Let us discuss here in our video how light casts shadows and shades, which defines the shapes of architectural elements, like this one in the window, like this one. Lights and shades and shadows added beauty to a structure, especially when it illuminates the interior using the natural sunlight. So, architects and students must observe how to use the sunlight or the natural light to the advantage of the interior of your building. It goes out with the theory of green architecture using natural light. Natural light not only illuminates interior space, but it adds beauty and also it minimizes energy consumption inside the building. That is why natural sunlight is a good source of light without consumptions of energy. A shadow. Cast shadows are important in drawing for two reasons. First, they anchor the image so it doesn't seem to be floating in air. Second, they add visual interest and help link objects together. Just observe carefully the figures, the drawing in these slides. Here are some examples of floating balls, because the shadow seems give space. So there is an importance of shadow in object. It will create illusion of floating, of anchor to the ground. When drawing a cast shadow, keep in mind that its shape will depend on the light source as well as on the shape of the object casting it. A sphere casts a round or elliptical shadow on a smooth surface. Notice the shadow here, it is elliptical, depending on the angle of the sunlight or the source of light. The angle of the light source, the length of the shadow is also affected. The lower the light, the longer the shadow. Here are some examples of shaded and shadow figures. Highlighting is giving a value to the object with a contrast from highlights to lowlights into shaded parts of the object. Example is the fruit here. Either side the white of your paper for the brightest highlights or retrieve them by picking them out with an eraser or painting them on with white gouache. Shading. Shade in the middle value of these grapes with a couple of swift strokes using the side of a soft lead pencil. Then increase the pressure on your pencil for the darkest value. Ibig sabihin, idiin ang lapis kung gusto ng dark value at huwag idiin kung gusto ng lighter value. Leave the paper white for the lights. Dito, huwag nyo nang shadean. Leave the paper white for the lightest. Shading. Shading is the varying degree of value from light to dark, which created on an object by the light, which strikes the angled and the curved planes of that object. Here are examples. In pencil drawing, the values range from white to grays to black And it's the range of the values in shading and highlighting that gives a three-dimensional look to a two-dimensional drawing. Meaning to say, it will give illusion of three dimension when it is properly shaded. Sketching the shapes. First, lightly sketch the basic shape of this angular wedge of cheese, and then laying in values. Here are the lights is coming from the left, so the cast shadows fall to the right. Lightly shade in the middle values of the side of the cheese and place the darkest value in holes where the light doesn't hit. Elements of light and form. Shadow. Form shadow. A. Core shadow. B. Reflected light. Number 2. Cast shadow. A. Reflected light. Area in light. Number 4. Middle tone area and highlights at number 5. So ito yung guys. Number 5 is the most lighter area here. And then it gives a tones or value going darker. Here at number 4, number 3, and then here is the core or a form of a shadow. And the casted shadow here. Using the angle of the sunlight, which is probably 45 degrees, is the most used angle in casting shadow. So dito ay 45 degrees. Or you can use 30. But the recommendation is 45 degrees for casting shadows. Here are some techniques to draw a sphere. Make a restating lines and then slowly put a value on your circle. And right here, at the end, the correct shading and the correct shadow will give finally an illusion of three-dimensional object. Here are directional blights you can use. The most common is from left corner going to the right bottom corner at this figure number 1. And this is the step-by-step way in drawing the ball or the sphere. Form a shadow here at number 3. Let's begin with number 1, putting the angle of the shadow, and then start finding the casted shadow and the shaded area of the ball. And number 3, here is already your shadow. At number 4, try to figure out where you put the highlight here at the top, and find your darkest area in the sphere, and put also reflected lights from the surface to the back of the sphere. At number 6, your ball or your drawing is so much like of a photograph figure. Here are some materials you can use for shading. You can use the brush, hard tip brush or flat brush, kneaded eraser, soft and hard pencils. Okay, at ito ang aking example ng mga drawings on how to draw or how to put shade and shadows on basic forms like the sphere that is generated by the circle, the cube which is generated by the square, and the pyramid which is generated by a triangle. Okay, here's the basics. On an object, you should put a highlight, a mid-tone, reflected highlights, core shadow, and the shadow. This is called tones or tonal values of an object. tonal value is just like a value on an object from highlights to lowlights into shades and shadows. Here are some basic ways on how to put a shade and shadow on your object, like the sphere. You should put highlights on every object that you draw using your pencil. The hard pencil should be used for outline or guidelines, while the soft pencil will be used for shading and casting shadows. Here in this video is shown how to put shades, the medium shades, the heavier shades, and the shadows on every basic forms, like this one, the cube, which is generated by the square. Now try to take a look at how the shadow was formed in the cube. And here's a pyramid, which is a shape generated by a triangle. Try to observe which side of the pyramid is much shaded and which side is just lighter. And observe the strokes of the pencil, the tonal values of the shadow. See how the edges of the shadow was rendered by a pencil. Shadow doesn't have sharp edges. It must be smooth from light to dark. Here is how the cylinder is being rendered by soft pencil. Try to observe where to put more shades or darker shades, and what is the shape of the shadow of the cylinder. And lastly, we have here the cone. The cone is another generated form from a triangle. Okay guys, at the end of the video, you will have an activity, a homework for you to do at home, and then submit it during weekend right here in our school. Alright guys, ito yung inyong activity number 2, ang paggawa ng shade and shadows on a different shapes object like this one. Dito mag-shade kayo sa baba nitong hexagon. Palitan natin ng gray. Okay. Example of how to make shadow on an object using 45 degrees angle of light. So ito yung imagine natin guys na light from the left corner at i-project natin yan in any object dito sa ito. Tulad niyan at itong hexagon yan. At yan ay ma-imagine na natin na diyan nakalagay ang kanyang shadow. Example lang ito guys ha. And then dito naman sa half sphere or dome ay ganyan yan. So, dito tayo mag-shade or mag-cast ng shadow. Okay? Example lang to guys ha. Pero sa inyo ay pagbutihin nyo ang pagcast ng shadow in 45 degrees. Ayan. Dito sa base, ang base ang mahirap lagyan ng shadow kasi ang base ay walang flat surface yung ground. Ang shadow niya ay bababa dito sa gaganyan yan, bababa sa kanyang pinapatungan. Ayan, tapos tatama din ang iba dito sa ibabaw ng hexagon. Ganyan. Kaya ang shadow ay pwedeng mag-curve depende sa curvature ng mga objects. Hindi palagi straight ang shadow. Depende yan sa curvature of an object na or ground. Ang curvature ng ground, kung ito ba'y merong mga holes or mga bundok-bundok. Kaya magbabago ang anyo ng shadow depending on the ground. Kung saan lalagpak ang shadow. Okay. Activity number 2, all you have to do after drawing this is compile it on a brown envelope and on midterm, ating ikolekta lahat ng drawings nyo from prelim to midterm. Okay? By the way, sa background, tips ko lang sa inyo guys, ang background, ito ay dapat ang background ay different ang kanyang value or tone. Example, kung itong ground nyo ay light gray, example kasi lapis yan, kung ito ay light gray, meaning to say ang background yan ay dark. Kasi you should have to observe contrast. Kaya ganyan ang mangyayari niyan guys. Darker ang background at lighter yung ground niya. Dito naman sa mga shaded parts, ganyan yan. Okay ba guys, mga example lang yan, pero sa inyo ay talagang i-analyze nyo yan kasi yan naman ang talagang ating pag-aaralan sa aking subject, ang shade and shadows of architectural elements. Ito ay mga basic pa. As we go on, yung ating lagyan ng shadow ay mga bintana na mga poste, mga bahay, going advance. Okay? So, pakita ko lang sa inyo ang itong pwedeng mangyari dito guys sa ito yung shadow nyo sa drawing. Okay? Pero huwag niyong kopyahin yung aking ginawa kasi hindi naman talaga ito tama. Yan ay example lang. Ano ba ang gamitin dito guys sa paggawa ng shade and shadows? Okay, ang gamitin nyo ay lapis lamang, dalawang klaseng lapis, isang hard at soft. Ang soft pencil ang gagamitin sa pag-shade while yung hard pencil ay ang pag-outline sa figures or shapes of objects na i-drawing natin dyan. Okay, so klaro na, ang gawin natin ay lagyan ng shades and shadows ang mga figure dyan sa aking binigay. Okay guys, and don't forget to subscribe. Hit the notification button, the bell para kayo updated sa mga latest upload ko sa ating klase. Maraming salamat. See you on my next video.